In the darkest year of the Great Depression, when nearly 1 out of every 4 Americans had no paycheck coming in, no government safety net to catch them, and no hope on the horizon, they didn't just survive. Some of them actually found ways to thrive, using methods that history has nearly erased. The 14th entry on this list was so wildly profitable that powerful industries conspired to wipe it out completely. And number 3? It fueled a shadow economy worth more than the entire annual budget of several small states combined. These 20 forgotten income strategies required 0 bosses, 0 office space, 0 formal credentials, just raw determination and a kind of creative desperation that modern comfort has slowly suffocated. Desperation is the mother of invention, and America forgot its own mother. Before we dive in, take a second to subscribe to Winds of Thought, because what you're about to learn might just rewire how you see work itself. Let's begin the countdown. Number 20. Scavenging rags and bones. Long before recycling bins appeared on every curb, the rag and bone man was a familiar sight, from Boston's back alleys to Chicago's stockyards. These entrepreneurs pushed handcarts or guided mule-drawn wagons through cobblestone streets, shouting for old fabric, animal bones, scrap metal, and discarded paper. Textile factories gladly paid cash for cotton and wool scraps, which they shredded and rewove into fresh cloth. Bone dealers shipped their haul to glue factories and fertilizer plants. A skilled scavenger in 1890s New York could pocket $1 daily, about $30 in today's purchasing power, enough to keep a family of 4 fed. Immigrant families crammed into Lower East Side tenements ran on this underground economy. Mothers sorted rags by fiber type at worn kitchen tables, while their children hauled burlap sacks through narrow passageways. By 1900, an estimated 25,000 residents of New York City alone survived on waste collection. The sanitation department eventually ran them off, claiming public streets as government territory. But for decades, rag picking was the first shaky rung on America's economic ladder for families who had absolutely nothing else to stand on. Number 19. Hawking fruit on street corners. When the stock market vaporized in October 1929, the International Apple Shippers Association faced a mountain of unsold fruit. Their clever solution? Extend credit to jobless men at $1.75 per crate, roughly 60 apples, which could be resold individually for a nickel each. Within months, some 6,000 fruit vendors lined Manhattan's sidewalks. That image became the Depression's most haunting photograph. A man in a frayed suit, his fedora pulled low against the wind, standing beside a wooden crate holding a hand painted sign that simply said, 5. Lucky sellers raked in $2 or $3 on sunny days, enough for a boarding house room and a hot meal. Others stood numb in freezing rain and sold absolutely nothing. Cities tried to outlaw them. Shop owners complained they blocked window displays. But for an entire generation of men who had lost everything, that apple crate represented the final shred of self-respect between them and the humiliation of a breadline. Number 18. Renting out spare bedrooms. Before apartment complexes ran credit checks and demanded security deposits, ordinary American families routinely opened their homes to strangers. Census records from 1900 show that roughly 1 household in 5 in urban areas housed at least 1 paying guest. In New England mill towns, a widow with 3 empty rooms could keep her house afloat just from boarder rent. She'd cook breakfast and supper, wash sheets on Mondays, and collect weekly rent every Friday. A single room in a 1920s Pittsburgh boarding house cost between $2 and $4 weekly. The arrangement was so normal that architects designed homes with separate entrances specifically for boarders. Children grew up sharing dinner tables with traveling salesmen, steelworkers, and school teachers. The practice quietly vanished after World War II, when suburban mortgages and restrictive zoning laws made it illegal in most residential neighborhoods. We didn't invent side hustles. We just criminalized the old ones. We legally regulated away one of the oldest survival strategies in American history. Number 17. Wild ginseng harvesting. Deep in Appalachia's hidden hollows, families dug ginseng roots from the forest floor and sold them to buyers who shipped directly to China. This trade dates back to the 1700s, when fur traders discovered that American ginseng commanded astonishing prices in Asian markets. By the 1870s, dried root fetched $3 to $5 per pound at West Virginia and Kentucky trading posts, a small fortune when coal miners earned $1 for a full day's work. Entire families spent September and October roaming the woods. Children spotted the distinctive red berries, while parents carefully excavated roots with hand-forged tools. A single good season could generate enough cash to carry a family through the frozen winter months. That knowledge passed silently from grandparents to grandchildren. Which ridge held the oldest plants? Which north-facing slopes produced the biggest roots? Overharvesting and habitat destruction have made wild ginseng increasingly rare, but in isolated mountain communities, the tradition survives. Diggers still walk the same hollows their great-grandparents walked, searching for the route that connected Appalachian poverty to a market halfway around the world. Number 16. Door-to-door homemade food sales. Long before food trucks became trendy and Instagram bakeries went viral, women in every American city cooked in their kitchens and sold directly to neighbors. In the 1920s and 30s, Black women across the South baked sweet potato pies, fried chicken, and pound cakes, then carried them through neighborhoods on trays balanced atop their heads or packed into woven baskets. In Mexican-American communities stretching from Texas to California, women sold tamales from pushcarts, earning enough to cover rent when their husbands couldn't find construction work. A plate of tamales cost a dime. A whole pie went for a quarter. These women ran real businesses without storefronts, without licenses, without bank accounts. Their only advertising was the aroma drifting down the block and the word-of-mouth recommendations that followed. Health departments eventually cracked down, demanding commercial kitchens and permits that most home cooks couldn't afford. The cottage food industry booming today is really just a return to what American women were doing a century ago, before regulations made feeding your neighbors a potential crime. Number 15. Lake ice harvesting. Before electric refrigerators existed, ice was one of the most valuable commodities in America. Farmers across New England, upstate New York, and the upper Midwest spent winters sawing blocks from frozen lakes and ponds, packing them in sawdust, and storing them in insulated ice houses. A single farmer with a good pond and a strong back could harvest enough ice to earn more than his crops brought in all year. By 1880, the ice trade employed over 90,000 workers and shipped millions of tons as far south as New Orleans and even to Caribbean islands. The pay was brutal but dependable. Ice cutters earned between $1 and $2 daily, and the work came during the dead of winter when nothing else could be done on the farm. Families depended on that seasonal income to bridge the gap between autumn harvest and spring planting. When mechanical refrigeration arrived in the early 1900s, the entire industry collapsed within one generation. Lakes that had sustained whole communities fell silent. The ice houses rotted away. One of America's great seasonal economies vanished as if it had melted under a summer sun. Here's where the story takes a darker turn, because the next few entries weren't just forgotten, they were actively erased. Number 14. Commercial laundry from home. For nearly a century, washing other people's clothes was the most dependable income source available to American women who couldn't leave their houses. In the decades after the Civil War, formerly enslaved Black women across the South built an entire economy around laundry. In Atlanta in 1881, washerwomen organized a massive strike. 3,000 women demanding a uniform rate of $1 per dozen pounds of wash. It was one of the largest labor actions in the post-Reconstruction South. The work was backbreaking. They hauled water, boiled it over open fires, scrubbed fabric on washboards until their hands cracked and bled, then hung everything to dry and pressed it with heavy, sad irons, heated directly on the stove. A washerwoman in the 1890s might handle 30 to 40 pounds of laundry per customer each week, but she set her own hours, worked from her own home, and answered to no foreman. When automatic washing machines became affordable in the 1950s, the profession evaporated. Millions of women lost their primary income source, and one of the most significant economic contributions of Black women in American history was reduced to a historical footnote. Number 13. Running the numbers game. In Harlem, on Chicago's South Side, and in Black neighborhoods across urban America, the numbers game was the underground lottery that kept cash circulating when legitimate financial institutions shut their doors. A player picked 3 digits and placed a bet, sometimes as small as 1 penny, with a local runner who delivered the slips to a banker. The winning number was drawn from a public source, often the last 3 digits of that day's horse racing totals, to prevent fraud. By the 1930s, the numbers racket in Harlem alone generated $20 million annually. It employed thousands as runners, collectors, and counters. Stephanie St. Clair, known as Queenie, ran one of the most successful operations, using her profits to fund community organizations and fight police corruption. The numbers game was illegal, but in communities locked out of banks, credit, and legitimate business opportunities, it served as both economy and social safety net. When state lotteries arrived in the 1960s and 70s, they adopted the exact same model, took the profits, and called it progress. Number 12. Selling blood and plasma. During the Great Depression and well into the 1960s, selling blood was one of the fastest ways for a desperate American to put cash in hand. Blood banks paid between $5 and $25 per pint, depending on the city and the donor's blood type. Skid rows in every major city had donation centers within walking distance of flop houses and soup kitchens. The regulars were known by name. Some donated as often as twice weekly, leaving them pale and dizzy, but with enough money for another night's rent. In the 1940s, the Red Cross relied heavily on paid donors to supply blood for the war effort. The practice came under scrutiny in the 1970s when contaminated blood from paid donors was linked to hepatitis outbreaks. Today, selling whole blood is effectively banned in the United States, though plasma donation for compensation remains a multi-billion-dollar industry. The irony is sharp. What was once a survival strategy for the poorest Americans became the foundation of a pharmaceutical supply chain that now generates enormous corporate profits. Number 11. Moonshine whiskey. Long before Prohibition made it famous, homemade whiskey was currency in rural America. Appalachian farmers discovered early that a bushel of corn worth 50 cents could be distilled into 2 gallons of whiskey worth $4. The math was irresistible. By the late 1700s, whiskey was so widely used as a medium of exchange that when the federal government tried to tax it in 1791, Western Pennsylvania erupted in the whiskey rebellion. That tradition never stopped. Through the 1800s and into the early 1900s, families in the hills of Kentucky, Tennessee, and the Carolinas operated stills as naturally as they planted tobacco. Prohibition just made it more profitable. A gallon of moonshine that cost 60 cents to produce sold for $6 to $8 during the 1920s. Runners modified their cars for speed, outrunning federal agents on twisting mountain roads, a tradition that directly birthed NASCAR. When Prohibition ended in 1933, the moonshiners didn't stop. Many kept running stills well into the 1960s, not out of rebellion, but because it was the only economy they had ever known. Now here's something nobody talks about. The next few entries reveal how American ingenuity didn't just survive hardship, it created entire underground economies that the government spent decades trying to destroy.